Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we try to figure out the motives, actions, and legacies of some of the most polarizing figures of today.
That's right.
Today, we're going deep into a case that's both chilling and culturally significant. The story of Ed Gein.
Okay.
Now, you might not recognize the name right away,
Yeah.
but I guarantee you've seen his influence
Oh, yeah.
reflected in some of the most iconic horror villains of all time.
Absolutely.
So we're going back to rural Plainfield, Wisconsin in the 1950s.
Oh, okay.
Ed Gein,
Yes.
a quiet, unassuming handyman,
Right.
but with a secret life so disturbing,
Oh, yeah.
it would change the horror genre forever.
Definitely.
All right, so we have a stack of research here.
Oh,
We've
yeah.
got court documents, we've got psychiatric evaluations,
Mm-hmm.
analyses of the films he inspired.
Right.
Our mission is to understand what drove Ed Gein to commit such horrific acts.
Right.
Was it mental illness?
Right.
Was it the influence of a domineering mother, or something even darker?
Well, let's start with his family. His father, George, was, by all accounts, a weak and alcoholic figure.
Okay.
His mother, Augusta,
Mhm.
she was the dominant force.
Okay.
A religious zealot who instilled in Ed a deep fear and hatred of women.
Wow.
She believed that women were inherently sinful and corrupting.
I mean, that's heavy stuff.
It is.
How does a child even process that kind of messaging?
Right.
And on top of that, sources suggest that Ed already struggled with a speech impediment and social awkwardness.
Uh-huh.
So to be bombarded with this intensely negative view of women,
Right.
it's no wonder he retreated further into himself.
Yeah, and that isolation was further compounded by Augusta's insistence on keeping Ed close.
Really?
He was homeschooled
Wow.
and discouraged from making friends.
Oh, God.
This created a breeding ground for a warped worldview,
Right.
where his understanding of women was shaped entirely by his mother's twisted teachings.
It's tragic, really,
Yeah.
because he was already vulnerable.
Yes.
And then to be so intensely indoctrinated by his mother.
Mm.
Some sources even suggested he was bullied as the child, which probably amplified his isolation and further twisted his perception of the world.
Absolutely. And this is where the family dynamic gets even more complex.
Okay.
Ed's older brother, Henry, recognized the harm in Augusta's teachings.
Oh, okay.
He challenged her views and tried to protect Ed.
Okay.
But tragically, in 1944, Henry died in a fire.
Oh, wow.
The circumstances were suspicious.
Okay.
Some suspected Ed's involvement,
Really?
though it was never proven.
That's a chilling detail.
Yes.
Regardless of the cause, Henry's death left Ed alone with his mother, further solidifying her control.
Mm-hmm.
Sources suggest that when Augusta died in 1945, Ed boarded up the rooms she used,
Oh,
preserving them as shrines.
really?
It's like she continued to dominate his life even in death.
That's a powerful observation.
Yeah.
It seems Ed was trapped in a cycle of isolation and unhealthy attachment.
Right.
He filled the void left by his mother with some disturbing hobbies.
Oh, gosh.
He developed an intense fascination with anatomy,
Okay.
devouring medical textbooks and even accounts of Nazi concentration camp experiments.
Wait, Nazi experiments.
Yes.
That's a whole other level of disturbing.
It is.
It's like his morbid curiosity knew no bounds.
Mm-hmm.
But this wasn't just a theoretical entry.
Right.
The research indicates that Ed started robbing graves, driven by this desire to understand the female body,
Okay.
and even more disturbingly, to create what he called a woman suit for himself.
It's a chilling example of how his warped worldview and morbid fascinations manifested in reality.
Right.
Ed would skin the corpses, fashioning their flesh into these grotesque garments, masks a corset made from a human torso.
Oh, my gosh.
It's hard to even fathom the level of depravity.
It's like something straight out of a horror movie, except this was real life.
It was.
And it's important to note that while these initial crimes involved desecrating the dead,
Right.
they eventually escalated to murder.
In December 1954,
Okay.
Ed killed Mary Hogan, a tavern owner who resembled his mother.
Oh.
He later confessed to shooting her and dismembering her body.
Oh, gosh.
For almost 3 years, she was just another missing person.
And then, in November 1957, he claimed his second victim,
Right.
Bernice Worden, a hardware store owner.
Yes.
This is the case that would finally expose the full horror of Ed Gein's world.
It's important to note that these are the only 2 murders Ed confessed to.
Okay.
However, the discovery at his farmhouse raised questions about the true extent of his crimes.
Let's talk about Bernice Worden's case, because it was pivotal in uncovering the true extent of Ed's crimes.
Okay.
He'd been in her store that morning and even chatted with her son.
Yeah.
When her son found the store empty,
Yeah,
the cash register missing, and blood on the floor, suspicion immediately fell on Ed.
I see.
What the police discovered at Ed's farmhouse was a scene of unimaginable horror.
Right.
They found Bernice's headless body dressed out like a deer hanging from a meat hook.
Wow.
It's hard to even begin to comprehend that level of depravity.
It is.
Like stepping into a nightmare.
Right.
I can't imagine what those officers must have felt walking into that house.
Yeah.
Confronted with human remains fashioned into everyday objects.
Right.
Skulls turned into bowls furniture, upholstered with skin lampshades made from faces.
It's a scene that has haunted investigators and the public imagination ever since.
Right.
And it's important to remember that while some body parts were identified, many were not.
Right.
This raises the chilling possibility of additional victims.
That's what makes this case so disturbing.
Yeah.
The line between fact and speculation blurs,
Uh-huh.
especially with a figure like Ed Gein.
Right.
His crimes were so horrific that they fueled a lot of speculation and over time turned him into an almost mythical figure.
But even stripping away the myths and focusing on the facts,
Yeah.
Ed Gein remains a chilling figure in American history.
Absolutely.
The question is, did he technically fit the profile of a serial killer?
That's a great question, and one we'll dive into deeper in the next part of our deep dive.
So we left off with that question. Did Ed Gein actually qualify as a serial killer?
Right, and the traditional definition requires 3 or more murders.
Right, with a cooling off period in between.
Right, and Ed only confessed to 2.
Exactly. Mary Hogan and Bernice Worden.
Right.
However, there's the unsettling presence of those unidentified remains at his farmhouse.
Yeah, not to mention the suspicious circumstances surrounding his brother Henry's death.
Right.
I mean, it's hard not to connect the dots and wonder if Ed's crimes went beyond those 2 confessions.
It is tempting to speculate,
Yeah.
especially given the sheer horror of what was discovered.
Right.
But it's crucial to separate fact from fiction.
Right.
We can't attribute every unsolved crime or suspicious death in the area to Ed Gein simply because he had this morbid fascination with women
Right.
and a pretty gruesome collection.
I see your point. We need to stick to the evidence.
Yes.
Still, those missing women and the uncertainty surrounding Henry's death cast a long shadow on Ed's story.
Yeah.
It's possible we'll never know the true extent of his crimes.
And that ambiguity is precisely what makes Ed Gein such a compelling figure.
Yeah.
In both true crime and popular culture.
Yeah.
He becomes almost this mythical figure.
Right.
A bogeyman representing the darkest impulses of humanity.
He certainly had a profound impact on popular culture.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, his case inspired some of the most iconic horror films of all time.
Absolutely.
It's almost like his crimes seeped into the collective unconscious
Yeah.
and found their way onto the big screen.
Absolutely. You see a clear connection in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho,
Oh, yeah.
released in 1960.
Yeah.
The isolated motel, the mother-fixated killer Norman Bates' fascination with preserving his mother's remains.
Right.
It's all drawn directly from Gein's case.
But Psycho wasn't just a rehashing of Ed Gein's story, was it?
No.
It felt like Hitchcock used those elements to explore something deeper.
Right.
Something about the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary people.
That's a brilliant observation.
Okay.
Psycho elevated the horror genre. It shifted the focus from supernatural monsters to the monsters within ourselves.
Yep.
Those hidden psychological demons that can drive ordinary people to commit extraordinary acts of violence.
And then just a few years later, you have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974.
Right.
Leatherface,
Right.
the masked killer who wears human skin and wields a chainsaw,
Yeah.
clearly inspired by Gein's crafting of trophies from human remains.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre takes a more visceral slasher film approach.
Right.
It's a raw, relentless assault on the senses.
Yeah.
But even in its brutality, you can see the echoes of Gein's case.
Right.
The violation of the body, the blurring of boundaries between the living and the dead.
Both Psycho and Texas Chainsaw Massacre tap into our primal fears.
They do.
The fear of the unknown, the fear of being hunted, the fear of a monstrous potential that exists within us all.
And let's not forget The Silence of the Lambs from 1991.
Right.
Buffalo Bill with his obsession with creating a woman suit by skinning his victims.
Right.
That's a chilling echo of Ed Gein's macabre tailoring.
It's amazing how Ed Gein, a man from this tiny Wisconsin town,
Right.
became this touchstone for exploring our darkest fears in popular culture.
Absolutely.
I mean, his case is a constant reminder that reality can be far more horrifying than fiction.
And it's not just the films themselves. The
Yeah.
themes and imagery that Gein inspired, isolation obsession, the breakdown of societal norms,
Right.
have permeated horror and true crime storytelling ever since he's become this archetype of the disturbed, isolated individual
Right.
who descends into madness and violence.
It makes you wonder, what is it about his story,
I know.
decades later, that continues to fascinate and repel us?
I think it's the gruesomeness of his crimes, the glimpse into the darkest corners of the human psyche, or the way his story has been reinterpreted and reimagined in popular culture.
Right.
It's likely a combination of all those factors, but I think it also speaks to our enduring fascination with the unknown
Yeah.
and the desire to understand what drives people to commit such horrific acts.
Especially in a case like Ed Gein's, where there's still so many unanswered questions.
Right,
I mean, was he truly insane, or was he simply evil?
right.
Where do you even begin to draw the line?
That's where the legal aspect of his story becomes particularly interesting.
Okay.
After his arrest, Ed Gein was deemed mentally incompetent to stand trial
Okay.
and spent years in a mental institution.
That's right. And it wasn't a short stay.
No,
He spent a significant amount of time in institutions,
he did.
even becoming a model patient at times.
Wow.
It's hard to reconcile that image with the monster the media portrayed him as.
It's a stark reminder that even the most horrific acts can be rooted in complex psychological factors.
Yeah.
Ed Gein wasn't born a monster.
Right.
He was shaped by his environment, his traumas, and of course the profound influence of his mother.
So are we saying that his upbringing excuses his actions?
Not at all.
Okay.
But understanding the factors that contributed to his crimes can help us navigate the complexities of the human psyche and the legal system.
It raises important questions about accountability, the nature of evil, and the role of mental illness in criminal behavior.
It does.
These are issues that continue to challenge us today.
Absolutely. And Ed Gein's case serves as a chilling reminder that the line between normality and depravity can be thinner than we'd like to believe.
Which brings us to the question of his legal fate.
Okay.
After years of confinement,
Yes.
Ed Gein was eventually deemed competent to stand trial for the murder of Bernice Worden.
Right.
What happened during that trial?
That's a discussion for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore the outcome of the trial, Ed Gein's final years, and the unsettling legacy he left behind.
We left off talking about Ed Gein's competency to stand trial after spending years in a mental institution.
Right.
It's a complex issue.
It is.
Because how do you determine if someone is truly incapable of understanding the consequences of their actions?
It's a question that has challenged legal and psychological experts for centuries. In Ed Gein's case, the court initially deemed him unfit for trial,
Right.
which meant he was confined to a mental institution rather than facing criminal charges.
Right, and he spent a considerable amount of time there, didn't he?
Oh, we did.
Years, in fact.
Yes.
It's almost hard to reconcile that image of Ed Gein as this quiet, compliant patient with the horrific crimes he committed.
That's the paradox of this case, isn't it? We're
Yeah.
trying to make sense of a mind that was clearly disturbed.
Right.
Some experts believe that Ed was a master manipulator, playing the system to avoid punishment.
Right.
Others argued that his mental illness was genuine
Right.
and that he lacked the capacity to fully grasp the gravity of his actions.
So how did the court ultimately resolve this?
Well,
Did Ed Gein ever face a jury for his crimes?
he did in 1968,
Okay.
more than a decade after his initial arrest.
Wow.
Ed was deemed competent to stand trial for the murder of Bernice Worden.
Okay.
The trial itself was relatively straightforward, with much of the testimony focusing on Ed's mental state.
It must have been a bizarre and unsettling experience for everyone involved.
Oh, I'm sure.
A man accused of such horrific acts.
Right.
Yet the central question was whether he understood the nature of his crimes.
Right. The prosecution argued that while Ed was clearly disturbed, he was still capable of understanding right from wrong.
Okay.
They pointed to the planned and deliberate nature of his crimes as evidence of his awareness.
Right.
The defense naturally pushed for an insanity plea, emphasizing the profound impact of Ed's upbringing
Right.
and his documented mental health issues.
So it sounds like a classic legal battle.
It was.
Prosecutions seeking justice for the victim,
Right.
and the defense trying to understand the motivations behind such a horrific act.
In the end, the jury sided with the defense.
Okay.
Ed Gein was found not guilty by reason of insanity.
Wow.
And sent back to the Central State Hospital for the criminally insane.
So Ed Gein never served a prison sentence despite the nature of his crimes.
That's correct. His case highlights the complexities of the legal system when dealing with mental illness.
Right.
It forces us to grapple with questions of accountability and punishment, and whether it's truly possible to separate evil from illness.
It's a sobering reminder that there are no easy answers when dealing with cases like this.
No.
Ed Gein died in 1984 from respiratory and heart failure due to cancer.
Okay.
He was 77 years old. Even in death, his story continued to generate controversy.
It did.
His grave in the Plainfield cemetery became a macabre tourist attraction.
Oh, wow.
People chipped away at his headstone, taking pieces as souvenirs.
Really?
It got so bad that the original marker was stolen.
I find it disturbing that even in death, Ed Gein couldn't escape the shadow of his crimes.
Yeah, the original headstone was eventually recovered and is now on display at the Wapaka County Historical Museum.
Okay.
It's almost as if people couldn't let go of the morbid fascination they had with him.
It speaks to the enduring power of his story.
Yeah.
How it has become ingrained in our culture. Ed Gein represents something primal, a darkness we both fear and are drawn to.
Right.
He's been immortalized in films, books, and true crime documentaries, ensuring that his legacy, however unsettling, will endure.
It's a chilling thought. What do you think is the ultimate takeaway from Ed Gein's story?
I think it's a reminder of the complexity of the human psyche.
Yeah.
The darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly ordinary individuals.
Right.
Ed Gein's case challenges us to confront the uncomfortable reality that monsters aren't always born.
Right.
Sometimes they're created by a confluence of circumstances, trauma, and societal failings.
It's a reminder to be vigilant, to understand that the line between sanity and madness can be fragile.
Yes.
And to strive to create a world where mental health is prioritized and the seeds of darkness are less likely to take root.
That's a powerful and thought-provoking message.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the disturbing yet compelling case of Ed Gein.
Of course.
We've explored his crimes, his psyche, and his lasting impact on popular culture. We encourage our listeners to delve further into the resources we've provided if you're interested in learning more.
Absolutely.
Until next time, stay curious. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones that walk among us.